century medicines, creating superbugs like MRSA, as well as strains of E. coli, tuberculosis, and gonorrhea. Professor Davies described the production of new antibiotics as an empty pipeline, so patients would die from what was once a treatable infection. When the drugs don't work, what can we do? Well, antibiotics have been one of the greatest success stories in medicine, but when drugs cease to work, doctors are facing a monumental battle, especially in staph infections. Scientists in the U.S. have resorted to tracking the DNA of a lethal strain of bacteria after drugs and tight quarantine procedures failed to stop a superbug from spreading rapidly in a hospital. 11 people died after a woman with this bug was admitted to a National Institute of Health clinic in Maryland in 2011. It was only when computer analysis of Evelyn Snitkin, 31, sequenced the bacteria and was able to figure out at least how to treat parts of it to make it not quite so deadly. And hospitals is where this is really breeding. You know, have you ever heard a story about somebody going to the hospital and picking up something that they didn't have when they went in? Because these hospitals are a hotbed for these things.
America's hospitals are places of healing and hope, but they're also home to a growing threat. You may have heard of MRSA, a dangerous infection that can usually be treated with antibiotics. But now an increasing number of patients are being infected with a new class of superbugs that are difficult, if not impossible, to treat. Tonight, the human toll these deadly infections are taking.
I don't know what went wrong. It's so not fair. It's a very difficult thing to swallow.
Jackie Cash and her sisters, Katie and Moira, weren't worried when their 78-year-old father, Bill, checked into this New York hospital earlier this month with a highly treatable form of pneumonia. But now this once healthy, active man is clinging to life after he got an infection that's resisted everything the doctors have thrown at it.
You realize, oh my God, there may not be something out there that can actually, fix this. And that is a horrendous realization.
The organism raging through Bill Shields is called KPC Klebsiella. It's one of the 5 deadly superbugs turning up in America's hospitals with alarming frequency, now responsible for 60% of all ICU infections.
What these organisms have done by creating super antibiotic resistance is they've sent medicine back 70 years in time.
Brad Spellberg is an infectious disease doctor and author of a new book, Rising Plague.
There are increasing cases of infections caused by bacteria that are resistant to every FDA-approved antibiotic. And we literally have no treatment for those bacteria.
The particularly vicious Klebsiella, first reported 10 years ago in one hospital in one state, has now been found in hospitals in 35 states.
A lot of what we do is basic detective work.
At the Centers for Disease Control, Arjun Srinivasan tracks these lethal superbugs.
I think the most common sources that we see for the transmission of these types of organisms are the hands of healthcare personnel.
These bacteria can live for years on hospital surfaces, entering the body through open wounds, catheters, and ventilators. Outpatient surgical centers are particularly vulnerable. A recent study found more than half didn't practice necessary infection control through hand washing and sterilization.
It was the worst day of my life.
Keisha Warren's 67-year-old mother, Ruth, got a superbug at this outpatient clinic in Columbus, Ohio, where she went for a pinched nerve in her back. But just days after surgery, she became infected by Acinetobacter, which used to be found only in battlefield hospitals.
How do you think your mom, going through elective surgery, got this superbug?
Somebody had to have touched something in that room that contained that live bacteria. And she got that obviously within her body. She didn't go in there with it.
17 days after her surgery, Ruth Burns was dead.
Must have been so impossible for you to believe that this had happened to your healthy mom.
Absolutely. devastating. Devastating. She was 10 days away from retirement, the happiest chapter of her life, and would never have one day to enjoy.
How did we get to this point?
For many years, we always had resistance with us. But for years, whenever it caught up, the drug companies would just come out with the next generation of antibiotic and the problem would be solved. We're no longer getting bailed out with new antibiotic development.
And families like Bill Shields are paying the price.
Seeing my dad on a ventilator is just, it's a very difficult thing. Our lives right now are very, very different than where they were a few weeks ago.
It's estimated tens of thousands of people are dying from these superbugs every year, but only half the states require hospitals to report infection rates. So public health officials fear the numbers may be even higher.
Well, of course they're going to be higher. And it's not just in Columbus, Ohio, where this lady died 17 days after her surgery. Concerns have been raised once again over this superbug after an individual at the National Institute of Healthcare Center in Bethesda, Maryland, died Friday after contracting a antibiotic-resistant strain of bacteria. According to the Washington Post, this person from Minnesota contracted this bug while being treated in a hospital for complications from a bone marrow transplant. So far, this is the 19th patient in this health center to have contracted bacteria. This KPC, the bug's outbreak was traced back to a single patient who was carrying the bacteria when he was admitted to the hospital. What did they say? And this was the clinic center in Bethesda, Maryland. They said, we're deeply saddened by the death of the clinical center related to KPC. The health and welfare of patients is our top priority, and we will continue to take every measure possible to protect patients at the clinic center to quell this transmission. Well, they went on to add that the clinical center is taking strong action to keep the KPC from spreading any further. The latest death raised serious questions about the rise of bugs no longer treatable with antibiotics. The emergence of these antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria has become a dilemma over the last few years, as it's been increasing every single year. This staph germ, known as MRSA, has caused a reported 18,650 American deaths from MRSA since 2005. Doesn't that make you want to not go to the hospital? You know, and what does it say in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, chapter 7? Kingdom will rise against kingdom. There shall be famine and pestilence. You know, I think we've seen the beginning of this whole pestilence thing with AIDS, from which there's no cure. You know, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a place in the Bible where the Lord says that people who engage in this kind of activity, homosexual activity, immoral activity, that he will put them in a sickbed that they will not get out of. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening, not only with AIDS, but also with all of these superbugs. I mean, this is just incredible how all of these things are coming about. You know, we also have to deal with this in our food, because bacteria, E. coli, is also in all of the meats that we buy. It's in our food. There's an acceptable level that our bodies can handle. But if you don't deal with this stuff correctly, this can be big trouble.
For the last 2 years, Dr. Lance Price has been on patrol.
I am that guy walking down the aisles of the grocery stores, buying every different brand of pork chops that I can find.
He's been tracking some of the most dangerous bacteria in our food supply. Dr. Price is one of many scientists who suspect that 21 million pounds of antibiotics fed to healthy animals on farms to promote growth are teaching bacteria to outsmart antibiotics, creating drug-resistant strains of infections like staph.
Thousands of animals tightly packed into unhygienic quarters, given regular doses of antibiotics. It's a perfect scenario for drug-resistant bacteria to grow.
Dr. Price's team tested 136 meat and poultry samples from grocery stores nationwide and found 47% contaminated with staph. Even more troubling, more than half the bacteria were resistant to at least 3 classes of antibiotics routinely used to treat skin, blood, and respiratory infections in humans.
The biggest thing that came out of this study was the recognition that multi-drug resistant staph is a routine contaminant of our food supply.
Even though staph can be killed by cooking meat at the proper temperature, it still poses a risk.
If I was sitting here handling a piece of poultry and I was doing it on this counter and then I didn't properly clean it up, I am then making my baby's bottle. I have the potential of contaminating whatever bacteria is in the meat on the baby bottle and giving it directly to the baby and the baby being sick.
So we could end up seeing the baby here because of the poultry bought in the supermarket.
Correct.
One recent study found nationwide more than 50% of all skin and soft tissue staph infections were antibiotic resistant. And to understand why that number keeps rising, today's study says, look no further than the farm. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
Well, you see, it's going to be hard to get away from any of this stuff. They're giving antibiotics to healthy animals to promote growth. This is about greed. This is about getting as much money out of every single pig or cow or whatever, chicken, whatever they're harvesting. They want to get every single penny out of it that they possibly can because there's never enough money, ever. And it wouldn't matter if these things grew as big as a house, it still wouldn't be enough. This is greed gone amok. I'm telling you. And we see greed across the board. Well, what can we do about all of these? Unfortunately, they say there's not a lot you can do as a patient. If other people are using unnecessary antibiotics, they're promoting the development of these resistance. This might affect you even if you did absolutely nothing. Other people are causing this. The biggest effort that a hospital can undertake is to ensure that their infection control and prevention departments are up to date. You know, for the average individual, just take proper precautions. Thoroughly wash your hands, making sure that the surfaces that you're preparing food on are clean. It's more important now than ever before. You know, there's a critical shortage of antimicrobial agents, which is causing huge problems. You know, you may just go buy processed anything. I mean, we've seen these recalls how many times when they're recalling simple things that are not processed, spinach or cabbage or something like that, because you know, a worker in the field urinated somewhere, you know, on a head of cabbage. It goes through the process and doesn't get cleaned properly, ends up in the bag in the grocery store. You buy it, you take it home, you put it on your plate, you feed it to your family, and everybody's infected. Salmonella or E. coli, or, you know, it could even be worse, and some of these strains are untreatable. So what are we supposed to do about it? I mean, at some point you have to buy something from someone somewhere. Well, you need to clean it properly, first of all. You need to cook it thoroughly. You know, some of you people like you. I like my steak bloody. Just char it on the outside, and I want the rest dripping. Well, you know, those days may be over, because you may be exposing yourself, your family, to these superbugs. Even if your family is not eating a super rare steak or a moderately rare steak, you know, the juices or the preparation from it, or the fact that it cooked in the same pan might make a huge difference. If you're eating something that's infected and it's cooked in the same pan as somebody else's, you know, they're going to get it too. So you can't be greedy about this. You can't be self-centered and say, well, I like mine this way, you cook yours more if you want, because there's still a chance for infection there. And for the eugenics people,